everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of our Executive Insights podcast, sponsored by the School of Business here at Washington University of Science and Technology. Today, I'm overjoyed and thrilled with my next guest today, Greg Young, who is the CEO of Leadershape Global, a professional services coaching training company. So, Greg, welcome to our podcast today, and thank you for joining us all the way from the UK.
A real pleasure to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Great. Well, just a little bit about Greg. I know you have some extensive experience within the healthcare, life sciences area. You were also part of a senior leader in a telecommunications firm. And now it looks like from your LinkedIn profile, you've been with Leadershape Global now for, 20 years or so.
Yeah, that's right. It's gone in an instant.
Time flies by fast when you're having fun. But I did also want to mention at the outset that Greg Young and others at Leadershape Global, John Knights and Danielle Grant, have published a couple of books now. The first one, I believe, was 2018, is Leading Beyond the Ego. I enjoyed reading it. I'm reading it again. And their latest book from 2022, Leadership, Transpersonal Leadership in Action. So 2 must-have books if you're in the coaching profession and wanting to increase your skills. So, tell us a little bit for our viewers exactly what Leadershape Global is and does.
Okay. So Leadershape Global is a leadership development organization. And we deliver that leadership development through coaching. You've mentioned that already, but also through programs, facilitated programs, either formal or informal, remote or in person. We've always been a dispersed organization. We've never really had offices. So we now work around in a very modern way. We're called global because we have partnerships around the world, India, Kazakhstan, Brazil, North America, Europe, Africa. So we are a global organization, and we all subscribe to the same philosophy, which is around that of transpersonal leadership. So you've mentioned leading beyond the ego.
Right.
I think what we were frustrated by was many leadership development programs, which seemed to be a sort of patchwork quilt of different leadership frameworks, philosophies. And so what we did in Leading Beyond the Ego, how to become a personal leader, was to codify, if you like, a journey to transpersonal leadership, starting with, why leadership? And then we take a view. So what we hope to get, where we hope to end up, is to build leaders who we call our transpersonal. And those people can be radical thinking while being ethical and authentic leaders. I would say that a transpersonal leader is one of those people that's reached a state of leadership maturity where they no longer lead. So they recognize the benefit of setting their ego aside in their leadership practice.
Gotcha.
So they no longer do things for power, prestige, recognition, reward. They do it for a greater good. They understand what their personal values, ethics, purpose is, and they're able to align that with that of the organization. All right.
Gotcha.
What we see is if you can envisage a Venn diagram, a 3-circle Venn diagram, where you've got your IQ, then that's more or less set. What we can do is to build emotional intelligence, and then we also look at something else which we call spiritual intelligence, which isn't around religion. It's about how your values and ethics are set. And what we're looking for is that crossover in the middle, that sweet spot where those 3 come together, so we can build this radical thinking, ethical, authentic organization.
Right. And one reason I found the Leading Beyond the Ego book sort of an essential read, I would say, is that, there are so many leadership models out there, But to me, the transpersonal leadership model is one of the things that you could, I guess, sort of hang your hat on in some respects, right? It's a specific focused program that helps leaders and their teams. It's not just about the leader, but certainly leading a team, creating a high performance culture, high performance teams. So it's certainly, check a box off, some of the, I guess, other leadership models of the day. So that's why I found it really interesting and it is hard to do, let's face it, taking your ego out of your leadership style. I'm sure it takes a lot of a definite mindset change, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's a different mental model, I think, of leadership, one which is very fit for the future. We see in a post-pandemic environment that we're so interconnected. We are living in this complex adaptive system. And what we've really come to realize is that you can't lead effectively in this environment where your ego comes first.
Right.
So I'm not saying that you don't need to take into account the ego. You need to recognize it and you need to manage it.
Right.
And and unless you do that, actually, it's impossible effectively to lead in a complex adaptive system.
Right. And certainly that's a great segue into my next question, which was just recently, I sat in on your one of your webinars that was co-sponsored with, I believe it was Agenda Consulting out of the UK. And one of the slides in that program I wanted to ask you about does get to that complex model of where we find ourselves in the world. I think that slide mentioned a lot of different criteria, right? Certainly COVID pandemic, multi-generational workplaces. So, what are some of the other, I guess, the difficulties or challenges now that leaders are finding themselves in?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Mark. When I ask, I think of quite a lot of things that are going on globally, like the geopolitical situation. We have currently a war in Ukraine. We have the impact of that. We are living in a post-pandemic environment. But actually, if you're a jobbing leader, if you're a jobbing manager on the ground, I think one of the biggest challenges is hybrid working right now, because the COVID represented an inflection point for hybrid working. Right. And in fact, many people needed to homework totally during that period. And I think the leaders and managers now are finding it very difficult to change their behaviors to lead effectively in this hybrid working environment. True. I also think that we have a dawning of artificial intelligence, and I read just today that organizations are looking to use artificial intelligence more than recruit new people. So that's going to have, I think we're just coming in to the big impact that's going to have on acquisition and retention of talent.
Right.
And so that's, if you like, something down the line. So all of these things, if we think about hybrid working, then even the onboarding process needs to change. And you'd be really surprised how many organizations have yet to review their onboarding policy when they bring in people who are expected to work in a hybrid working environment.
Right. And I'm sure both of us come from backgrounds where if you weren't in the office and your boss couldn't see you, right, you weren't working, right? You had to be you had to be able to check on people to make sure they were there. And if anything that the COVID pandemic has taught us is that people can just be as effective, if not more effective, from a hybrid or remote working environment. So some of the leaders and managers and companies have had to kind of go through that mindset change as well, that, hey, people can be just as effective, if not more, if they're working remote.
You're absolutely right. I don't know how it is in the States, but in the UK, it used to be called home shirking rather than home working. So if you weren't in the office, then you weren't working, and especially those people who were home working on Mondays or Fridays. So that was right. They were just granting themselves a long weekend. But recent data I was reading this morning shows that actually you can be more productive if where you have home working, there's a kind of a sweet spot where if you're in the office around 20% of your time, then that gives maximum productivity because people relish the possibility of being more flexible with their own time and not having to commute to work each day. But on the other hand, from an organizational perspective, if you're not in the office at all, then you begin to lose contact in that, and that relationship is very difficult to manage.
Right. And I think with that, if you have people who are remote working, it gets to a whole other dimension of, well, how do you manage a virtual team, right? It used to be very easy, or perhaps challenging, but somewhat easy to lead and manage people when you're in a face-to-face situation. Now, when you are, meeting by Zoom or whatever, right, it calls for a new sense, a new group of skills, if you were, to manage virtually. Is that part of the transpersonal leadership model?
Absolutely. Somebody said his name was Chuck Stout, and I have a great regard for him. He's an American friend of mine. And he came out with a wonderful statement. He says, transformation happens at the speed of trust. And that word trust is so, so important that if you're transitioning to a hybrid working environment and all that, then your role as a leader is to build trust,
right.
Is to build people that trust you and you build your trust in people. Without that, then you're constantly thinking, well, these people aren't working. They're not doing what I've asked them to do. All of those sorts of things in your mind, because it's not filled with, yes, I can see that they're at their desk. I can see what's on their screen. I can see what they're doing. You have to have trust in people. And I think that's one of the things that transpersonal leadership brings, is the ability to build trust in people.
Right. And if you don't have the trust, you're not going to be effective, either as a leader or as an employee, as a team contributor, you might say.
Absolutely. I think that trust is one of those things that takes a lot of effort to build, and it can be got rid of in an instant. So yes. I think as a leader, one always needs to be mindful of your own behaviors. Are they behaviors that are going to build trust in the people around you or from the people around you? And equally, am I giving somebody the benefit of the doubt? Well, how can I build trust in them? How can I let some things go?